Hi, thank you for joining me. My name is Mindy Mandell. Okay, so the title of this video is of course a bit tongue-in-cheek, but Plato's Gorgias does raise an interesting dilemma that some find to be something of a head-scratcher. Well, this dialogue is named after the famous rhetorician Gorgias. And joining the conversation are also two of Gorgias' students. At one point in their discussion, Socrates makes this declaration: I think that you and all other men as well as myself hold it worse to do than to suffer wrong, and worse to escape than to suffer punishment. Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't grow up hearing anybody talking like this. So what could he possibly be talking about? Who would ever want to be wronged? And why would it be worse to do wrong than to suffer it? And if I did ever do anything wrong, why would I hope to get punished for it? Now, be honest. You've had a fantasy or two about doing something wrong and getting away with it, haven't you? I think we all have. Some people would even go so far as to say that this is the absolute best scenario: to do anything you want and never suffer any consequences or ever be held accountable. So how can Socrates make this case? What is he talking about? So this is what I will focus on in today's video. I'm going to pull out a few of the key arguments. Now, this is a long dialogue, though, so if you want to see more of a comprehensive presentation of this dialogue as a whole, I do have videos on that, which I will link at the end. Okay, so first I want to look at this exchange Socrates had with a student named Polus. In the fabric of man's material estate, do you see any other evil than poverty? No, only poverty. And what about bodily constitution? Would you say its evil is weakness and sickness and ugliness and such things? I would. And do you consider there to be an evil condition of soul? Certainly. And do you call this injustice and ignorance and cowardice and the like? Certainly. Then for these three, material fortune, body, and soul, you have named three evils: poverty, disease, and injustice. Notice here that he's using injustice alone to mean all the virtues, or the opposite of all the virtues, all the vices. And Polus says yes. Now, which of these evils is the most shameful? Is it not injustice and the evil of the soul in general? Yes, by far. And so already we see that Socrates' reasoning is rooted in the value he puts on virtue in the soul. Still, I imagine it seems to some of you like silly idealism. Socrates is seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. So is this just his idealistic opinion, or is there any truth to it? Because many people would agree that yes, justice is a virtue. That doesn't mean they never do anything wrong, or would want to be punished when they do meander into wrongdoing. And let's face it, some people do a whole lot wrong, and they seem very happy. Yet still, this is Socrates' position. The wicked man and the doer of evil is in any case unhappy, but more unhappy if he does not meet with justice and suffer punishment. Less unhappy if he pays the penalty and suffers punishment from gods and men. So Socrates is claiming that doing wrong makes a person unhappy, even more so if that person does not pay a just penalty for it. He argues that the worst life is one filled with vice, but never corrected of it, so that injustice then remains in the soul, rotting and corrupting the soul further. He compares such people to those who refuse a doctor's care when they're ill because they fear surgery. He is evidently ignorant of the meaning of health and physical fitness. For apparently, as our recent admissions prove, those who escape punishment also act much in the same way, Polis. They see its painfulness, but are blind to its benefit, and know not how much more miserable than a union with an unhealthy body is a union with a soul that is not healthy, but corrupt and impious and evil. And so they leave nothing undone to avoid being punished and liberated from the greatest of ills, providing themselves with money and friends and the highest attainable powers of persuasive rhetoric. Eventually, another interlocutor, a man named Callicles, steps in. He found Polis to be far too polite throughout this discussion. Callicles takes more of a might makes right position, and he does not shrink from saying what, he argues, everybody thinks, but most find socially unacceptable to vocalize. Now, for the most part, these two, nature and convention, are antagonistic to each other. And so, if a man is ashamed and dares not say what he thinks, he is compelled to contradict himself. And so here is Callicles' view of true human nature. By nature, everything that is worse is more shameful. Suffering wrong, for instance. But by convention, it is more shameful to do it. But in my opinion, those who frame the laws are the weaker folk, the majority. And accordingly, they frame the laws for themselves in their own advantage. And so too with their approval and censure, and to prevent the stronger who are able to overreach them from gaining the advantage over them, they frighten them by saying that to overreach others is shameful and evil, and injustice consists in seeking the advantage over others. They are satisfied, I suppose, if being inferior, they enjoy equality of status. And then he goes on to say, but in my view, nature herself makes it plain that it is right for the better to have the advantage over the worse, the more able over the less. And both among all animals and in entire states and races of mankind, it is plain that this is the case, that right is recognized to be the sovereignty and advantage of the stronger over the weaker. Socrates clearly has a tougher opponent in Callicles than he had in Polis. And with further discussion, Callicles comes out even stronger. But the truth, Socrates, which you profess to follow, is this. Luxury and intemperance and license, when they have sufficient backing, they are virtue and happiness. And all the rest is tinsel, the unnatural catchwords of mankind, mere nonsense and of no account. Socrates replies, you make a brave attack, Callicles, with so frank an outburst, for clearly you are now saying what others may think but are reluctant to express. Okay, so how is Socrates going to counter this? Well, he begins by comparing the insatiable desires of the intemperate to somebody trying to carry water in a sieve. I once heard one of our wise men say that we are now dead, and that our body is a tomb, and that that part of the soul in which dwell the desires is of a nature to be swayed and to shift to and fro. And so some clever fellow, a Sicilian perhaps or Italian, writing an allegory by a slight perversion of language, named this part of the soul a jar, because it can be swayed and easily persuaded. And the foolish he called the uninitiate. In that part of the soul in foolish people where the desires reside, the uncontrolled and non-retentive part, he likened to a leaky jar, because it can never be filled. And in opposition to you, Callicles, he shows that of those in Hades, these uninitiate must be the most unhappy, for they will carry water to pour into the perforated jar in a similarly perforated sieve. And by the sieve, my informant told me, he means the soul. And the soul of the foolish he compared to a sieve, because it is perforated, and through lack of belief and forgetfulness, it is unable to hold anything. Well, throughout this discussion, it is clear that Socrates and Callicles are just worlds apart in their thinking. But a common theme throughout Socrates' argument is the value he puts on there being order in the soul. Look, for example, if you will, at painters, builders, shipwrights, and all other craftsmen, and see how each one disposes each element he contributes in a fixed order and compels one to fit and harmonize with the other until he has combined the whole into something well ordered and regulated. Other craftsmen in general, and those we were speaking of just now, who have to do with the body, physical trainers and doctors, give orders, I think, and discipline to the body. Do we admit the truth of this or not? Let it be granted. Then harmony and order will make a building good, but disorder bad. I agree. Is it not the same too with a ship? Yes. And with our bodies also, we say. Certainly. And what about the soul? Will it be good if disordered, or rather if it achieves a certain order and discipline? Here too, our previous argument demands that we agree. Now, what is the name of that bodily quality resulting from order and discipline? Health and strength, I suppose you mean? I do. And the effect of order and discipline in the soul? Try to discover and name it, as in the other case. Why do you not name it yourself, Socrates? Well, Callicles sees that he has been backed into a corner, and he does not want to admit that justice and temperance are good. So eventually, Socrates names it himself. The words lawfulness and law are applied to all order and regularity of the soul, whence men become orderly and law-abiding. And this means justice and temperance. Yes or no? So be it. As they go on, the more holes that Socrates pokes into Callicles' arguments, the more reluctant to continue Callicles becomes. It is tough going until finally Callicles gives up. Go on alone, my dear sir, and finish the argument. Then listen. But first, let me recapitulate the argument from the beginning. And so this gives us a summary of their full discussion up to now. Are the pleasant and the good identical? They are not, as Callicles and I agreed. Should the pleasant be done for the sake of the good, or the good for the sake of the pleasant? The pleasant for the sake of the good. And is the pleasant that at whose presence we are pleased, and the good is that whose presence makes us good? Certainly. But the goodness of ourselves and of all other good things is due to the presence of some excellence? That seems necessarily true, Callicles. But surely the goodness of anything, whether implement or body or soul or any living thing, does not best come to it merely by haphazard, but through a certain rightness and order, and through the art that is assigned to each of them. Is this so? I certainly agree. Then the goodness of anything is due to order and arrangement? I should agree. So we see here Socrates is talking to himself. It is then the presence in each thing of the order appropriate to it that makes everything good? So it appears to me. The soul, then, that has its own appropriate order is better than that which has none? Necessarily. But further, the soul possessed of order is orderly? Of course. And the orderly is the temperate? Most necessarily. Then, Socrates concludes, the temperate soul is good. One thing that becomes clear as this dialogue progresses is that Socrates is a spiritual man, and his view of the soul as our essence cannot be separated from his approach to life or to philosophy. In other words, you cannot embrace his logical reasoning ability but reject his spirituality. Not if you yourself are logical, that is. Wise men, Callicles, say that the heavens and the earth, gods and men, are bound together by fellowship and friendship, and order and temperance and justice. And for this reason, they call the sum of things the ordered universe, my friend, not the world of disorder or riot. But it seems to me that you pay no attention to these things in spite of your wisdom. But you are unaware that geometric equality is of great importance among gods and men alike. And you think we should practice overreaching others, for you neglect geometry. In other words, Callicles neglects order and proportion. Socrates has a different way to measure a good life than does Callicles. My good sir, just reflect whether what is good and noble is not something more than saving and being saved. Perhaps the true man should ignore this question of living for a certain span of years, and should not be so enamored of life, but should leave these things to God. And this is the person, Socrates argues, who will find the greatest happiness. So there is every necessity, Callicles, that the sound-minded and temperate man, being, as we have demonstrated, just and brave and pious, must be completely good. And the good man must do well in finally whatever he does. And he who does well must be happy and blessed, while the evil man who does ill must be wretched. And he would be the opposite of the temperate man, the undisciplined creature of whom you approve. And then, perhaps foreshadowing his own fate, Socrates declares, "If I should meet my death owing to a deficiency of flattering rhetoric, I am confident you would find me taking my death calmly. For no one who is not utterly irrational and cowardly is afraid of the mere act of dying. It is evil doing that he fears. For to arrive in the other world with a soul surcharged with many wicked deeds is the worst of all evils." And so this dialogue shows us the value of a just and ordered soul. The role of punishment, then, has nothing to do, of course, with masochism, but it also is not out of some sense of retribution. You hurt me, so you should be hurt too. No, that is not Socrates' idea of justice. What he means by a just punishment is that it has to correct the error in the soul. Forgiveness without learning is of no value. For Socrates, how we live our lives is more important than how long we live. The unexamined life is not worth living. Well, let me know in the comments what you think of this dialogue and of Socrates' approach to life. Is this an attainable goal, or is it just idealism? Let's get a discussion going. And as always, thanks for watching. Till next time.